Take it away, gentlemen.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Ravi, for the opportunity. And by the way, congratulations on the award. I think it's the least the community could have done to recognize your journey as well. But it just feels like so surreal sitting with you, having known you for 7 years now. We probably met in February of 2010.
Yeah.
The first time. And we probably recount some of this for our audience as well, talking about staying power and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, tell us about your own journey as to how you came to the Valley and how you painted the Golden Gate Bridge once, because we'll keep going back to this idea of how you paint a Golden Gate Bridge, because by the time you're done, you have to start again, all over again.
Yeah, and I think that really is the essence of Silicon Valley. It's just very dynamic, and things are constantly changing. Change is the constant, so you have to never sort of think that you can rest on your laurels and that what you're doing today is going to be the right thing to do tomorrow. And I think that's part of what makes it exciting. That's what creates opportunity, actually, for always the next generation of entrepreneurs. We call it sort of the creative destructive process. But yeah, I mean, my journey, just to put a little more detail on it, we came here when I was in high school. I ended up going to Stanford and studying engineering. And then, really I was an engineer for a brief period, did chip design, and I think it's also, you sort of see, what people in your family do, but my dad's journey had made a huge impression on me, so I was always curious about business. I ended up going to Stanford Business School. After that, I worked in the computer industry for a few years, and then I got into venture capital actually pretty early in my career. I thought it was going to be just a temporary job while I learned about how to, understand the startup landscape. I got in 1995, but as some of you may remember, the late 90s were a pretty crazy time in the Silicon Valley ecosystem. There were, startups, even more startups growing then, I think, even than today, and going public at crazy valuations. And so really ended up getting into that industry. And about 4 years in was really when I had a decision to make. So this was 1999, the Valley was rocking. And I was actually thinking maybe I should go do a startup because it's a good time to be an entrepreneur. And at that time, 3 other individuals who ended up being my co-founders at Lightspeed, who I had known from college, actually, and I think this is a recurrent theme. You started Nutanix, with actually people who you knew from, I don't know if they were batchmates, but from the IT days. But so 3 other guys that I knew from college said, hey, we're thinking about starting a venture capital firm. And that thought seemed a little strange to me. I was sort of like, well, and they were all my age. It was sort of like, we've all been in venture capital 3-4 years. Can we really start a firm? But what convinced me was, and again, I think this is an important lesson in entrepreneurship, they were people that I knew, I had a huge amount of respect for, I trusted, and I really thought, I don't know that if I want to do a startup in venture capital, but I do know that I want to do something entrepreneurial, and I know these are people that I really would love to work with. So, I sort of made a gut call that I was going to go try to do that, and it's amazing. 20 years later, we started Lightspeed. Actually, not quite 20, a little under 20, in mid 1999. But the 4 of us are still working together, all at Lightspeed, and we've had sort of a four-way marriage. Not that we always see eye to eye on everything, but we have a really close working relationship, and I think it's that fabric of co-founders who really want to kind of try to create something big together that has allowed us to really build Lightspeed from 4 people and a small office to today. We operate across China, India, Israel, and the U.S. And our active capital under management is a little under $5 billion, but we've sort of moved, I think, by design. Our desire was always to create a platform firm that could work with entrepreneurs at the earliest stage, but help them build companies that could be of the largest stage and really be transformational. And to do that, you need to actually have a fair amount of resources. You need to operate globally to have the right kind of insights. And you need to have scale to really be able to help companies at every leg of the journey. And, as Dheeraj said, I think the journey is never over. I feel like, we've probably repainted the Golden Gate Bridge 2 or 3 times already, but we're sort of at a scale point where we're really looking now about how can we, as Lightspeed, become an even stronger firm and it's a strong, be known for sort of a place that entrepreneurs who want to build, big and transformational companies, we have to be on the call list. So,
yeah, in fact, while he was talking, I was thinking about, obviously it's been a journey of probably a decade or more, a decade and a half. Now you have, App Dynamics and MuleSoft and, a little bit of, obviously I can say Nutanix is still a good company, not a great company, but Snap, if you look at Snap as an example, there have been all these massive stories in the last 10, 15 years, but in 2001, when 9/11 happened, you were a startup, like a idea that was trying to go and disrupt all these incumbents like Sequoia and Kleiner and all these massive names that existed back then. Tell us about the journey as to how it actually was about patience and perseverance and tenacity and the highs and the lows. Because people in this audience are also entrepreneurs and people who've, or CEOs of their careers who've gone through some of this as well in themselves.
Yeah, well, I think I'm going to actually turn it around on you because I think we should both answer that question. And actually, and Dheeraj and I have some shared experiences around highs and lows, and just really in the face of what seems like an impossible situation, how do you get through it? And each situation is different. You kind of answered the question in your question. There's no silver bullet. There's no magical way. I think if one decides to be an entrepreneur in any part of their life, to do something where it's just the outcome really is not known. You're taking on risk and you're just sort of walking a path that other people, aren't going to give you credit for and don't necessarily believe you can succeed at. What do you do? I have to say, as a venture capitalist, I feel like part of my role as maybe more of an established venture capitalist now, if I work with an entrepreneur, I can see those times in the journey when it just feels like everything is against you and you sort of really don't know how you're going to get through it. I feel like my job now is to say, it's okay, the sun will start to shine again, and basically, I'm here and Lightspeed is here and we're not going anywhere. So let's just kind of one step at a time walk down the path, and if we put our best effort into it, the things will reveal. And ultimately, my learning has been that if you really have a clear vision of where you're trying to get to and you are doing the right things, usually you will end up in some place that's better than you think. And I would say early, Dheeraj is right, after 9/11, four of us, we had raised our first fund and the markets crashed, and we had invested a reasonable amount of the fund, and that money was gone, and we were sort of staring at each other saying, how are we going to return capital even to our investors? Because if we don't, they're not going to want to do business with us again. And we really gut checked and said, hey, what is it that, why did we come together? Why did we even decide to start Lightspeed? And, we kind of all agreed in that moment. The thing that we got up every day and were excited about was really working with people who very early, at the very beginning, getting involved with people that we thought had big ideas where we could be, we always said, the right founders for us are people who we just get super excited about their ambition around disruptive product design. And what can we help with? Hopefully we can be helpful with disruptive business design. And we said, okay, that's the one thing we know we like to do, we think we're good at doing, and we should sort of ignore everything else and just focus on that. And really, we sort of walked the path. I think for about 2 or 3 years, people just thought Silicon Valley was never going to come back. This was sort of 2001 to 2003. But we didn't worry about that. We didn't, kind of try to hunker down. We said, we're going to go find people who still believe and want to build the next generations of technologies. And so it was actually a great time. We got involved with companies like Riverbed, companies like Versa, actually, Just for Gil, who was a founder I worked with during that time. They actually created companies that by 2005-06, when markets started to recover and Silicon Valley rebounded a little, that got out and went public and were kind of high value exits. And so I guess it's a little more of keeping the faith and having people around you who are going to be your supporters and knowing, really kind of understanding what your mission, your personal mission is, what you're trying to accomplish, and walking the path.
Yeah, in fact, if you think about the great companies that were born out of this recession era, like NetApp in '92 or VMware in 2000, 2001, it looks like these recessions provide great opportunities for at least the folks who believe in things to say, look, while everything is down, when the chips are down in the market is when I actually have to go and seed this idea and start to build a product, because it'll take 3, 4, 5 years to build something. And by the time the purse strings open up, when the real buyers become more confident, we'd have a product that's gone through its iterative design to become, that's what happened to us too.
Yeah, what was the moment for you, Dheeraj? I can think of a few, but I'm curious what, for the 7 years we've walked the path together, a moment for you when you sort of felt like, what was that big ambition you had with Nutanix in the early days in a place where you sort of felt like, wow, I know this is what I believe, but the sort of forces of nature are kind of conspiring against me?
I think, obviously when we started the business, it was 2009, September. So we were thinking about, is this the right time or not? And we, again, went back to this thesis that, best companies actually start in recessions. And we ended up finding Bipul, and that obviously I knew Bipul for like 7, 8 years before that. So, great friendships actually create these opportunities to come together and, explore synergies. And I think he was a fledgling in the VC industry, and we were fledgling entrepreneurs. So we said, we can work together. And then obviously there was serendipity when he met you, and, things just aligned together. And, just like you talked about Golden Gate Bridge, I was thinking, what would the audience relate to? Probably, a Bollywood star, is a good example, or a cricket player could be a great example of how do you need to go through these phases of painting the Golden Gate Bridge. When you finished it, then you need to restart again. Like Amitabh Bachchan, probably many of you would know him. And I was thinking about his career. I'm like, wow, the staying power of a Bollywood actor like that. He failed 7 times. The 8th movie was a success. And then in 1984, he was injured, and he came back, and everybody wrote him off, and he came back again, and then he went bankrupt with his last company, and then he didn't have an option in 2001, and then again the career. So every 5, 7 years, his career changed. And then you look at cricket stars, there's a lot of cricket players who actually do really good in one format of the game, and then there's another format that comes in, and there's a new format that comes in. So you have to keep reinventing yourself every 5, 7 years, actually.
But is there a moment, that you kind of recall with Nutanix where, along the path, you just said, wow, how are we going to get from where we are now to where we want to go? Some pivotal...
Yeah, I think, there were like at least 2 or 3 near-death experiences for the company now. Everybody looks at, wow, 7 years, it's been such a high-velocity company and such. And I'm sure a lot of you who are going through your own entrepreneurship trials and tribulations could relate to this. I think one of the moments was when we thought that the operating system that we run on top of is now a frenemy, is not a partner like VMware. And it's similar to
VMware, really.
Yeah, and I think I was trying to gain courage from that sort of adversity. I'm like, okay, so they're a partner, but we also run on top of them, but they're competing with us. And I went back to history because I read history a lot. I'm like,
because at some point, just to put a finer point on it, I think, indirectly, small company, you start hearing things like within VMware, they really view Nutanix as a important competitor. You realize a big incumbent has a bullseye with your company name at the center.
Yeah, and I think how did I sort of get out of it? As I went back to the 80s, I said, look, Apple and Microsoft had a very similar relationship. Apple was the king of the hill, Microsoft was an app company, and the way the Windows operating system came out was this sort of feeling that, look, you got to own your own destiny. If you went back to Google and Google Maps and Apple, I think, at the end of the day, there was this extremely tense moment when Google Maps, being on the Apple device, was only possible if Apple paid them a ton of money. So Apple Maps came about because of the way Google was treating Apple as well. So I think these partners, when they actually become complex sort of relationships, is when serendipity happen as well. And in our case, the turning point was when we said, we got to own our own destiny. We got to have our own operating system that actually was end-to-end as opposed to being...
And that was a big undertaking.
4 years ago, most people laughed at it. They said, well, who in the world needs yet another hypervisor? And I think today when we look back, it was probably the best thing that we could have done for this business.
And Nutanix today, just sort of, the amazing stats. I talk about the journey I saw my father walk through. Dheeraj is probably being humble, but the company in a 7-year period has gone from 3 people to I think over 2,000.
It's about 2,700 people.
Wow, I keep track. And from no revenues and no product to today, I mean, it's approximating $1 billion run rate. So, I mean, amazing achievement. And I just, where do you see, we're repainting the Golden Bridge once more over the next 5-7 years? Talk a little bit about where you think, you could go from here. I mean,
well, in the big scheme of things, if you look at let's say, if you take out our hardware piece and just look at the software piece, we're probably in the 600 million annual run rate business. And if you go back in time to where was VMware at this time, it was 2005 timeframe, Salesforce 2006 timeframe, Cisco EMC 1994, Oracle, Microsoft 1989, 1990. So the reason why I'm pointing out these years is tell you that, look, there's a whole decade after you've done 500 million software, 2 billion in billings and so on. And they were tiny companies back then. Salesforce.com was still a wannabe in 2005, actually. Nobody actually gave SaaS that much credence that could become something as big as it has become right now. So I think we have sort of broken the barrier, the first crack, in some sense, the re-architecture. Everybody's talking about the new architecture. But there's another 10 years of hard work ahead of us, which is why I think when people say we've done great things, I say we've done good things, but we could still lose it from here if we didn't actually state the course and had the staying power to say the next 10 years is where the hard work actually begins.
All right, we only have 5 minutes. I want to ask you a couple of the quick fire questions.
Yeah, and same here, actually. I have some for you too.
Well, one or two. What's the best business decision you feel like in the last, 7-8 years you've made? Is there one thing that sticks out?
I think it's the courage to build our own operating system, which went all the way. And I want to turn the question around. What's the best decision you've ever made?
That one I've had a lot of time to think about, but it was making the decision, unclear about everything else, but I said, these are people I really want to work with, and I just went with my gut on that, and the rest has been, ups and downs, but an amazing journey.
So people, relationships.
People, you realize as you get older matter more than anything else.
I'm going to turn the next one into a little bit, so it's not about the worst business decision you've ever made, but what did you learn from the worst one?
That's a good question. I think, it does come back to people again. I think there have been decisions where we've gotten, in VC firms, you get caught up sometimes in the competitive dynamic trying to win a deal, and you don't take the time to really understand who am I going to work with and how's the relationship likely to work over, because it's not over a few months, it's over 5 to 10 years. And, probably the learning from bad decisions are, don't get rushed into anything. Don't, really take the time to get the data and make a decision thoughtfully. What about you?
Yeah, I think, my lesson is more about what I want to learn and how do I want to have this mindfulness. And I talk about the word authenticity a lot because I'm learning about authenticity. So whenever something happens, I'm like, were we authentic? Were they authentic? How could I be more authentic? How could the company be more authentic? Authentic product, authentic customer service, authentic messaging, positioning, So the word authentic to me is the lesson from everything that comes out. And if I were authentic, if the company were authentic, then, there's, you can move on with some regrets and so on.
And what about one piece of advice that you would give entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs?
It's the topic of this session. It's the staying power piece. How do you really have that courage to say, look, when you think you're done is when you just began. And the same question back to you, actually. What's the biggest advice that you have?
The big piece of advice I would say, entrepreneurship is something you shouldn't do unless it comes from within. I mean, and there is a lot of, kind of expectation, I would say, almost in Silicon Valley that you just got to go be it's like everyone, and somebody said the analogy, and I really resonate with everybody in Hollywood, whether you're, working or waiting tables, everybody has a script sitting on their bedside table, everybody's an aspiring script writer. But I think if you want to be an entrepreneur, you should do it because you didn't get talked into it, you have an idea that you feel passionate about, and you really personally want to go walk that path. I guess the one other piece of it, people say entrepreneurship is risky. I agree that it is, but risk, it's one of those things that once you get into it, if you did it for reasons that really came from within, it's not risky in the sense that some bad thing is going to happen to you. It's risky only in the sense that you don't exactly know how it's going to play out, but if you put one foot in front of the other, usually, again, I think good things will happen.
Well, someone said the biggest risk is to not take one.
I think that's well said, yeah.
Right? Glass half full or half empty type of a guy?
I think, and I'm going to ask you, but I think it's going to be the same answer. As a venture capitalist, you have to be someone who you look at the world as being the glass half full, or you wouldn't do anything because, and particularly at our stage of involvement, we get involved when companies are at the formative stage. There's just a lot that's unknown. It's really about saying, hey, I'm going to go on a shared journey with someone. And, we play different roles, but the aim point is 5 to 10 years away. So you better be a believer and you better be all in or, you won't get there.
Yeah, for me, I think with people and relationships, I'm glass half full. Because then you have to believe in the goodness of people and goodness of relationships. On results, I'm glass half empty. It's like constantly dissatisfied with everything and so on. And the hard part is how do you mix the left brain and the right brain? Because it's really a left brain, right brain balance thing. Okay, one last question. If you weren't in this career, what other profession would you be in?
Yeah, people have asked me that, and maybe it's because I am really cut out for this, but I'm one of those people. I love what I do. I've been doing it for 20 years. I love meeting, really interesting, smart people who are energetic and want to build the next thing. I love meeting builders, and I love being able to work with them. So when people have asked me this question, I'm not sure that there's anything else I would do. I'm not sure I want to work as hard as I've been working for the last 20 years, but I think I'll always want to do something around technology and the fact that technology really, it was an amazing talk we heard earlier today about, even in life sciences, is bringing new goodness to the world, I hope, and I want to be able to be involved and help be a catalyst for that to continue to happen.
Awesome.
What about you?
I would have been a historian. I love history.
Lots to learn from history.
Because, it's visual when I go back to even, so I read a lot from Quora and history. I do a lot of History Channel and History Vault. And it just takes me back to, even the last 30 years of Wall Street Journal and thinking about how Oracle was built, how all these big companies are built, Microsoft and so on. So I think it's the history piece that really would have kept
We
me.
complement each other because I love thinking about the future. You're a student of history. And together, I guess, hopefully we've got a great future.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations again.
Yeah.
Thank you, folks.
It was great.
Yeah, awesome.
Okay.